just watching the logistical flow of American military resources into the region, that we had probably passed the point of no return, that once you flow a certain amount of military resources, the war will happen. It has to happen on a given timeline. That's just the way the world works. That's the way war works. If I'm seeing this, I have to hope that other people see it as well, or at least assume that other people see it as well, meaning the Iranians. But once again, the United States and Israel have carried out a illegal war of aggression. And I don't care where you stand on this issue. You can be as anti-Iranian as you want to be. It's an illegal war of aggression. International law does matter to everybody except Donald Trump. And there's no legal justification. Neither Israel nor the United States actually have tried to articulate a cognizable claim under international law. This is just pure, naked aggression. Premised on a lie, by the way. Israel calls it a preemptive attack, and yet there was ongoing negotiations, just like last time. Iran had put a significant offer on the table, the same offer they were preparing last time. So anybody who thinks this is about nuclear program, Iran's nuclear program, it's not. This is about Israel's ambition for a greater Israeli project, and the roadblock that was preventing it was Iran, the Islamic Republic, which has created an axis of resistance inclusive of Hezbollah, Ansarallah, Hamas, and Israel has determined that the only way that it can resolve these regional problems is by eliminating the regime, and now they have a compliant government in the United States that's willing to, again, sacrifice everything we claim to stand for as Americans, a nation founded on the principles of law, the rule of law, international law. Remind all the warmongering cheerleaders out there that the United Nations Charter is still considered to be a lawful legal document that's in place. The United States hasn't withdrawn from it. And if you're an American, you do understand that the Charter, since it was signed by a president, ratified by the Senate, is the supreme law of the land. That's what the Constitution says. So we have violated our own Constitution in carrying out this attack. I just want to set it straight up, because in conflicts, sometimes there's a gray zone. We don't know who's right or who's wrong. There's no doubt here. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And the United States is on the bad guy team, because we're the ones that are waging what was called the greatest war crime of all time, a war of aggression. There was no reason for this war. There was no imminent threat for this war. There was no justification for this. This is a surprise attack, although I don't think it took the Iranians by surprise. We're seeing a lot of reports now. I think the first wave was 50 cruise missiles fired into Tehran by Israel. I think Israel took responsibility for Tehran. I said this. It's the most easily predictable war plan one has ever seen. Israel will take decapitation. The United States will do suppression and trying to prevent ballistic missiles from launching against Israel. We're seeing a lot of imagery out of Tehran. What we're not seeing is what's going on in the missile launch areas, where I assume the United States is flooding the zone with our own missiles, our own aircraft, to try and blunt Iran's ability to send, massive amounts of missiles Israel's way. This is part of the deal. This is a war of regime change, straight up regime change. And Israel has acknowledged this. The United States has acknowledged this. Whether or not it succeeds, again, people need to understand this. This is one of the biggest gambles of Donald Trump's political career. He's going to lose this war. The chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff tried to warn him. We don't have enough ammunition. Iran's ready. This isn't good. But the Israelis have told the president that they have the intelligence, that they're going to be able to be successful in their decapitation strikes. And we'll find out if the Israelis were right. But even if they did, the Iranians have been preparing for this. They have, layers of succession. People have been pre-planned on what happens. Their country's broken into 12 autonomous military districts that have been preparing for this conflict for 30 years. So when we lose this war, and we will lose this war, and that doesn't mean that we can't get rid of the regime. We will lose this war because this will have devastating consequences. It's not going to be a quick war. There's going to be huge economic consequences for this war. And this pretty much guarantees that Donald Trump will lose the midterm elections. This is what's at stake here. This isn't about what's going on inside Iran. This is about domestic American politics with an American president so desperate because of how bad things are going that he has to carry out an illegal war of aggression in some Hail Mary effort to save his failing presidency.
Now, we heard early on that the Iranian president was targeted, the supreme leader was targeted. We just got an update now. They are both alive, according to Iranian sources. Trump said this will be an extensive war. So everyone talked about whether it will be a limited strike or an extensive war. Hezbollah said they will not join as long as it's a limited strike or limited operation. But Trump did say himself in the first statement, we'll play a bit of it in a bit as well, that it's been extensive. And a U.S. official also said that the Iranian response is expected to be pretty significant as well. I can't remember the exact word. So my question to you is, do you expect the targeting of the supreme leader and the president? And number two is, how do you expect Iran to respond this time around compared to the 12-day war?
Well, this was the most easily predicted thing. A decapitation strike means decapitation. So, of course, you go after the supreme leader, the president. They went after the judiciary. They went after the IRGC. They went after by some accounts, they went after the conventional military as well, going after the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff, etc. So this is a straight up decapitation strike. And that's what seems to be going on. Again, there are some people who speak of, as if they have some inside knowledge, 4 waves of attacks. I don't know. But I do know that, again, having done this kind of targeting for large-scale wars, the intelligence is perishable. People need to understand that, especially if you're going after leadership targets. During the Gulf War, we tried to kill Saddam Hussein on a number of occasions. Me too. I actually planned a number of attacks against Saddam Hussein. But it's you're collecting intelligence data that is perishable and is not necessarily 100%. And you have to act very quickly on this. So here we have a situation where they're trying to do this decapitation. It'd be interesting to know, how old this intelligence was. What was the information cutoff date for this for each of these targets? Because the Iranians have been preparing for this. They know this was going to happen. When you have an idiot like Scott Ritter out there, saying you're going to have decapitation strike. Okay, if it's so obvious to me, it's got to be obvious to them. And having spoken to Morandi and others, it was. So I can't imagine, again, knowing how targeting works, because it's not as easy as people think. When you get a hard target, you've now got to create data packages that get loaded up into the weapon systems. And if they're cruise missiles or anything, you got to have an overlay of air defense that you're dodging around, all updated. This takes time. So it's not like it's not a computer game where click, point, they're dead. It takes a while to develop these targets. And if the Iranians were smart, and I tend to believe they are smart, they have counterintelligence people who have done the math, and they're telling their boss, we got to move you every hour and 15 minutes. Because I'm just throwing out a number there. That's the reaction time for targeting. And if they're doing that, we will never get them unless we have human sources on the ground who are communicating back. But in the act of communication is in itself problematic, because the Iranians are going to be running around there looking for signals leaving Tehran, and they'll hunt down these people. So my point is this. This was always a flawed plan, because if the goal up front is to decapitate the leadership, and the next goal is going to be to suppress the regime's ability to respond. So they're going to be hitting barracks facilities, communications facilities, things to suppress the regime's response. All of this was predictable. It's the same plan we used, for instance, in Desert Fox back in December of 1998 when we struck Iraq. We launched a decapitation strike that killed nobody. And then we launched a security suppression, striking barracks facilities that were empty. The Special Republican Guard had left the barracks and were in their deployed status. The forces that need to protect this regime are not in their barracks right now. They are deployed, they are ready, and if the Mossad gives a signal for people to go up in the streets, those will be the shortest-lived demonstrations that ever took place on the face of the earth. So this plan has failed from the start. We have failed. And let me just say another thing, too. We only have a limited amount of ammunition. This is what the generals were telling Trump. We don't have enough ammunition to do this. We just blew a whole bunch of ammunition striking empty targets. And so now we're going to have to go into the adaptive phase. Now we have to start collecting intelligence. Where did they move? Because a decapitation strike that doesn't decapitate creates problems for your plan. We're going to start to see problems of targeting cascade downwards, because now resources that are supposed to be freed up when you decapitate, now we can take resources and apply them to other target decks, are going to have to be brought back and reinforced to complete the necessary first step of decapitation. This plan has fallen apart from the very beginning, Mario. Understand that. If they're saying the supreme leader is alive, if they're saying the president is alive, then we have failed. And now we're going to double or triple or quadruple the resources trying to hunt them down and finish this job. And we're going to run out of ammunition. And this is what the generals and admirals were telling the president. You can start this plan. You're going to run out of ammunition, and then you've got nothing. And the Iranians now, we'll see. Because I think, again, my guess is that we're trying to make it as difficult as possible for the Iranians to launch ballistic missiles right now. This is why we brought in wild weasel squadrons and a lot of tactical aircraft. Why do we have 12 A-10s? Probably because they're supporting special operation forces on the ground who are trying to hunt down Iranian missiles. So we may not see the massive launches of Iranian missiles right now because they may be suppressed. We'll see. I don't know. But what's going to happen is eventually we're going to run out of resources.
Yeah, Israel has a similar concern as well. The air defense ammunition as well is relatively limited in Israel. You said this operation will fail. If the goal is regime change, and I would agree with you that it is regime change, how can they achieve it? Is the US going to try to incite protests like we saw a few months ago? Or could we see special ops on the ground in Iran try and help with the overthrow?
Well, first of all, we have to be careful about the role played by special operations forces. They're good, but they're not perfect. This would go off the game plan that appeared to be in play in late December, early January, where Scott Bessent brags at the World Economic Forum about triggering a economic crisis, collapse of the real, dollar shortage, etc. But that was triggering a crisis in peacetime. I just think people need to understand what happened here. Iran's at war right now, so it really doesn't matter what the exchange rate of the real is, because the economy isn't normal. Nothing's normal right now. So, already we have a disjointed plan, because the original plan was to have an economic crisis that created legitimate protests in the street. And then the Mossad, and we saw this, the protests began December 28th. On December 30th, the Mossad comes out with their Farsi language social media and says, "We are with you on the ground." And after that, all the other Western controlled, opposition entities start coming out, and we see the peaceful demonstrations transition into violent demonstrations. Deliberate, targeted violence by these cells designed to promote an Iranian reaction from the security forces that would then be captured by these various entities inside Iran and broadcast out to be echoed by an entire chamber of useful idiots who start saying tens of thousands of dead, 20,000 dead, 30,000, all made up. There were about 3,000 dead. Many of them were security forces. A lot of them were killed by the Mossad and other guys just to create violence. But this is what happened. This echo chamber that creates this justification for response that led to President Trump saying help is on the way. But help wasn't on the way. We didn't pull the trigger there because the military said we don't have the resources to accomplish the mission. So we had to hit pause, then we had to flow in air defense, then we had to flow in military capability, and now we are supposed to have enough pieces on the ground, but you can't restart what we started back in December and January. We tried. You saw there were universities around the country. You saw demonstrators coming out there, bringing up their monarchist flags and all this kind of stuff. You're not going to get that. So the regime change is supposed to be predicated upon popular uprising. Basically people rising in the streets, suppression of leadership, suppression of security forces that leads to chaos, anarchy, and then the paramilitaries will come in, PJAK, the Kurds, the Baluch, and others. But we took too long. And again, if Scott Ritter knows this, so do the Iranian leadership, and so does the Iranian security forces, who are deployed, taking proactive measures. So all the things that had to happen to achieve regime change, economic crisis, popular uprising, suppression, decapitation, other forces coming in, they're all out of whack. It's just not going to work.
And what you're describing as well is no longer just a clean regime change. You're talking about a full-blown civil war if you have all these separatist groups moving in. What about Iran's retaliation? We heard news a few days ago that Iran was buying supersonic anti-ship missiles from China. China sent a lot of drones to Iran as well, suicide drones at scale. I'm not sure how many were delivered. What are Iran's capabilities today compared to the 12-day war?
You can receive weapons, but if you haven't trained on them, if you haven't exercised them, if you haven't put the whole support network in place, it's meaningless. Iran had tremendous capabilities during the 12-day war, but that was a very limited conflict. Again, American targeters have been following this, and as I said, I believe right now the American contribution isn't creating billowing clouds of dust in Tehran, but we are suppressing the Iranian retaliatory capability. I believe as we speak, American aircraft are bombing missile sites to prevent missiles from being launched against aircraft carriers, seizing control of Iranian airspace over missile operating areas so that if the Iranians bring the missiles out, we bomb them and we kill them. This is what we're doing right now. So we'll see about their retaliatory capability. But if anybody thought we were just going to bomb Iran and then sit there and let the Iranians bring all their toys out and fire them at us on terms acceptable to the Iranians, then they don't know what war is. This is an operation operating on a different scope and scale, and the United States is bringing in a level of firepower that has never been seen before in terms of its concentration and its lethality. So we may not see the waves of Iranian missiles that we saw last time. There may be a phase of combat where we get some leakers, but you're going to be looking at a war of attrition between the U.S. Navy, U.S. Air Force, and the Iranian Missile Command as we maneuver. But the goal here for the Iranians is for us to run out of ammunition, and then they'll start throwing the waves. And so that's what my guess will be, is that we'll see the waves of missiles later in this conflict as we lose our ability to control airspace because we have a finite number of resources. And if Iran can wait this out, and if they can make us expend resources, and again, I already told you, we're behind the power curve because we didn't achieve regime change. And so now we have
ballistic missiles. Sorry to interrupt. Ballistic missiles as reports that are detected heading towards Israel. So Iran may be retaliating as we speak.
Yeah, how many though?
We just came in now, so I'm not sure how many. I'll play, before we get more information on this response from Iran, I'll get the production team to play a clip from Trump, a quick 30-second clip to get your thoughts on it. And a few statements while they prepare the clip. Trump said, Americans may be lost and we may have casualties. We will destroy the threat from the brutal regime. Go ahead, KK.
States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries. Among the regime's very first acts was to back a violent takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of American hostages for 444 days. In 1983, Iran's proxies carried out the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut that killed 241 American military personnel. In 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. And we sought repeatedly to make a deal. We tried. They wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. Again, they wanted to do it. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what was happening. They just wanted to practice evil. But Iran refused, just as it has for decades and decades. They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to...
I think it's a clip of justification that makes no sense. And I thought, I started having hope yesterday. I think the Omanian foreign minister said yesterday that Iran was willing to give up their nuclear material, send it to the US. Now, I'm not sure whether that was confirmed or not, but that was last night before I went to bed. I'm like, all right, maybe this either would delay the war or we have a way out. And then here we are, hours later, the war has begun. Your thoughts on not much to comment really on what Trump has said. It's very clear that he's trying to justify the war, which doesn't make sense in American interests. What I'm more interested in how Iran will reply, how ready Israel is, and whether they will target US bases from the get-go or they'll target Israel first. What will be a better strategy for Iran?
Well, again, I think I always find it uncomfortable to, be speaking on behalf of Iran because I can't. I'm not going to. I'm not pro-Iranian. I'm a neutral observer. But the Iranians have said that this fight will be existential in nature this time. They said it will be different than the 12-day war. We know that the Iranians were very restrained during the 12-day war, that they could have done much worse to Israel, and they didn't. And again, look at their approach to striking the Al Udeid air base. Notification, firing older missiles. Only one or two modern missiles came in, and they just did a symbolic destruction of a multi-million-dollar radar. This time they say it's going to be different, very different, and that they're going to bring real harm to both Israel and the United States. They made it clear from the start that no matter how this war started, Israel will be held to account. And so I think Israel will be one of the primary targets for the Iranians. We may not have to see the mass missiles. Last time, they fired a lot of missiles. That was part of their strategy of depletion of air defense. But what they learned is you can penetrate these with modern missiles. So we may see some of the modern missiles up front. So you don't have to have massive launches because, again, if I'm a military planner, I'm not going to let you do mass launches. I mean, remember, we initiated this campaign, the United States and Israel. That means we get to determine where the priorities are. We're not reacting to them, they're reacting to us. And so having done the assessments of where these missile launches take place from in terms of the massed missiles, we should be having airplanes flying over, helicopters flying over, A-10s roaming the desert, looking for missile launchers. So if they're going to retaliate against Israel, I don't think you're going to be seeing the massive waves of missiles. You're going to be seeing, one or two, three or four, five or six modern missiles that are designed to penetrate the air defense. But no matter what, if this is indeed an existential conflict, then there's no timeline, right, Mario? Because this is a fight to the death. Now, if I'm a championship boxer, do I try and knock you out in the first round or recognize this is a 15-round fight? And I might even concede the first 4 rounds to you, let you tire your arms out. But we come down to round 10, round 11, round 12, and I'm still standing, you're tired, your hands start dropping, then the knockout blow comes. The Iranians have said this is an existential fight. So I think we need to understand they're not going to stop. This is not going to be stopped by Donald Trump picking up the phone saying, hey, let me run a symbolic midnight hammer run and you get to hit us and then the war comes to an end. This ends with the death of Iran or the death of Israel. That's it.
Are U.S. forces ready for swarm tactics by Iran? You can have the sea drones, the air drones targeting the warships. If you have hundreds of these drones heading towards the Lincoln, for example, how are military capabilities, the American military capabilities against that? And also, if you look at the ballistic missiles targeting the warships, putting aside Israel and U.S. bases, is that a threat to the U.S.? Could we see a warship get hit and potentially severely damaged?
Well, absolutely. But again, Mario, we started this fight. So the way we start this fight isn't to say we're going to give you every opportunity to launch a mass strike against our ships and put us in harm. We start this fight by saying you ain't going to launch anything. What do you think we're doing right now? We're blowing up all their launch facilities. We're seeking to suppress their ability to launch. We have aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln out there. You really think that we're going to give the Iranians the opportunity to fire missiles that are disruptive of launch and recover operations? No. We are blowing the crap out of everything. That's what we're doing. Now, the Iranians should be smart, which means hunker down. Let us expend the ammunition, which the Iranians know, thanks to the statements of the general, we have a limited quantity of. So we're going to sit there and suppress. And then we're going to run out of ammunition. And then they'll start threatening our...
just if you can mute it. If you can mute it. They're showing the ballistic missiles here. If you don't show any videos, just make sure it's muted. I'm guessing this is an Iranian ballistic missile heading towards Israel. I'm assuming that's Iran's retaliation. As you said, we will not see the same volume of ballistic missiles as we saw in the previous war, as this is a war of attrition. This is over Iraq right now, not over... so I'm guessing it's over Iraq from the team. Now, back to the Iranian response, Scott. I made a post earlier today, you might disagree with it. I said this will not be World War III. Hezbollah said they will not join, as I said earlier, as long as it's a limited strike by the US. US is making it clear it's not going to be a limited strike. How active do you think proxies will be, and do you think they could become a regional war, and what other countries could it involve? Well, more importantly, what would be the role of Russia and China? Could they be more involved this time around than during the 12-day war?
Well, let's start with Hezbollah. My understanding is before the 50 cruise missiles were fired from Israel against Tehran, that the first strikes were actually a very concentrated series of strikes against Lebanon to suppress Hezbollah. And then they launched this attack. I think Hezbollah will be getting involved. This isn't a limited strike. This is existential, which means Hezbollah understands that if the Iranian regime goes down, they go down. So there's no longer restraint. Hezbollah has never fought Israel unrestrained. Now we're talking about literally a life and death struggle for Hezbollah. So I think you're going to see the gloves come off. I wouldn't be surprised if Hamas did the same thing. It just said, screw it, we're going in, all in. Ansarallah has said the same thing. They will not only resume attacks against Israel, but they are going to seek to strike American targets in the region. Do we have sufficient military force for that? Are we ready to resume operations against Yemen? Does Israel have the ability to divert military resources from this now campaign they're committed to in Israel to Yemen, or is Ansarallah going to have more free reign to target things? But this will be a regional conflict, and then the Iranians have always threatened that they have the ability to do X, Y, and Z. Are they going to shut down the Strait of Hormuz? Because if this is an existential struggle, it should be shut down right now. Are they going to strike Saudi airfield. Saudi airfields are being used right now to support this war. Will they strike Saudi oil fields? Because that'd be the first thing I'd do. I mean, just to be honest, I wouldn't say I'd send some missiles to Israel, but I'd start taking out Saudi oil fields. And I'd start taking out Azerbaijani oil fields. I'd start taking out all the oil fields in the region up front. Because the only way you're going to get the United States to pull back is when our economy collapses.
Yeah.
And that will be the eventual outcome here. But because we're not going to achieve what we wanted. We didn't get the big boys. They're alive, which means the Iranians are falling back on pre-planned pre-planned actions. This will be a long, drawn-out fight for them. This war won't end with Iran saying we surrender. This war either ends with, Kurdish and Baluch pickup trucks running through the streets of Tehran, firing guns in the air as they take over the regime, or this ends with the destruction of Israel.
So you're 100%. So in your mind, this is definitely a regime change operation. It is not pressure to get Iran to hold on negotiations.
It's not in my mind. Israel has come out and said it. They've issued a communique.
Scott, Trump just said it for you just now. President Trump calls on Iranians to rise up and overthrow the regime. That just came in now from the team to overthrow the government. So we are going through a regime change operation, which I don't think even people that hate the regime, me included, don't understand how damaging this will be, not only for Iran, but for the entire region. That's why Gulf nations didn't want to see this war. That's why other U.S. allies didn't want to see this war. And you talked about an escalation ladder. Now, we know one military strategist was talking about how the U.S. will continue escalating until Iran folds on the negotiating table. But if we're talking about a regime change operation, this won't be applicable. If this does become existential, we have an escalation ladder on the Iranian side. And he talked about striking Saudi and Azerbaijani oil fields and closing the Strait of Hormuz. That would be probably the most damaging thing Iran could do to the American economy to work in their advantage. So what would be the strategy on the Iranian side? Is it just slowing it as much as possible? And what would it take for them to start escalating? Is it being able to strike the supreme leader? And also, if they do strike the supreme leader, if they do get him, what happens to Iranian leadership? Could they continue functioning without the supreme leader and the president? And this is strikes in Israel, by the way. These are strikes in Israel, by the way, now, Scott. They started landing. The team just sent me a message now.
Yeah. Welcome to war. I don't really give a damn. We're going to see a lot more of this. This is going to become commonplace, and you kick the hornet's nest, you're going to get stung. We know that they tried to kill the supreme leader because his residence has been destroyed. It was one of the first struck. We know they tried to kill the Iranian president because his presidential palace has been destroyed.
And the defense minister.
Defense minister has been tried to be. They may have gotten him. We don't know.
Sure.
There's reports. I mean, we remember the 12-day war. They killed everybody until it turned out they really didn't kill everybody. A lot of them were alive. But the Iranian supreme leader has said, "I'm a dead man. I accept this. And when you kill me, we will get a new supreme leader." See, people don't understand that this Iranian regime is a constitutional government. It's not a simplistic dictatorship the way it's sold in the West. It's a very complex, democratically based government. The Assembly of Experts is one of these panels in Iran that's responsible for monitoring the work of the supreme leader. People think he's a supreme leader. He can do anything he wants. That's not true. He's the supreme leader who has to carry out his actions in accordance with the Constitution and in accordance with Islamic jurisprudence. And if the supreme leader ever loses the ability to function in that regard, he can be removed by the Assembly of Experts, which is democratically elected by the Iranian people, by the way. But they're also responsible for having a list of people to replace the supreme leader instantly. So they know if the supreme leader is killed or incapacitated, they know automatically who they're going to pick, and it goes on and on and on. So there will be no decapitation until the regime falls. There's no such thing as decapitating and watching it run around like a chicken with the head's cut off. The same thing with the president. Iran has a constitution. Now, I know many people in the West don't want to respect that, and they denigrate the Iranian people. They don't call it them. It's the most functionally effective democracy in the Middle East, other than maybe Israel. It's a genuine democracy. Pardon?
Lebanon as well. You put that as a pretty good democracy.
I don't know. Lebanon's got some issues. You can't be a real democracy if your government is already dictated how many percentage is going to be Christian, Sunni, and Shia. So you've already imprinted some sort of controls over it. But the Iranians are a functioning democracy. And the West, we need to understand, because what that means is that this country that's been around for 47 years, as the president has said, it functions based upon the rule of law. It functions based upon, it's not on the whim of individuals. It's a system that has been around for a long time, and this system is sustainable. The Iranians have been preparing for an American war of existential proportions since Dick Cheney first threatened it back in 2005. That's when the Iranians woke up and said, we need to divide our country into 12 autonomous military districts, each one capable of sustaining the fight on its own in case they lose contact with Tehran. Well, that's what we have today. So there will be no regime change. This was predictable. I mean, anybody who knows anything about Iran knows that this was the case. So you can't change the regime.
Then how's this going to end? If there's not going to be a regime change, and that's the goal of the US and Israel, what's the end result?
Well, from the Iranian perspective, the end result will be that Tel Aviv will look like Gaza.
By the way, just to talk about regime change, Netanyahu said the same thing. Our joint action will create the conditions for the brave Iranian people to take their destiny into their own hands. Now, I said from the beginning, it's if this is a strategy to pressure Iran to fold on the negotiating table, to concede, then it may succeed. If this is a regime change operation, this is likely going to end up in a complete bloodbath. And based on what we're seeing right now,
let's look at
a regime change.
Let's look at this. All the demonstrations that took place in December paled in size to the pro-government demonstrations. That's always been the case. They've never had an opposition demonstration get out in the streets and everybody go, oh my God, that's the biggest thing we've ever seen. There is a significant number of people who are opposed to the regime. But the vast majority of the Iranian people, support the Iranian regime. And that's why this call for the people of Iran to rise up is stupidity personified. It means the people making that call have fallen victim to their own propaganda. We're going to find out just how much the people of Iran are willing to sacrifice to defend the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is zero, zilch, no support in Iran for the return of the monarchy. So this wet dream of having, Reza Pahlavi come back in and take his father's position. No. And all these minority groups, the Kurds, the Lar, the Azeri, they don't have the ability to launch a decapitation strike on their own. This is a fantasy that's premised on the people rising up, the leadership being decapitated, security forces being suppressed, and the people taking control. You hear it. That's what their words are. It's not going to happen.
Even if it happens, I don't think people understand that. Let's say it does happen, they achieve their objective. It's not as simple. There is no strong opposition leader. I don't think the regime is that popular in Iran. You said it's very popular. It's hard to really confirm 100%. But even if it's not popular, let's say it's not popular, there is no leading opposition figure that can take charge. So if the regime does fall, you've just got a country with all these different groups that are trying to separate from Iran, and that's what leads to civil war. Now we do have sirens in Bahrain. By the way, sorry, Scott, we do have sirens right now. Initial reports of sirens at the U.S. base in Bahrain. So could we see already retaliation against U.S. bases?
That would be the end of the Fifth Fleet headquarters. So yay, Mahark. I mean, look, Mario, this is going to happen all day long. We're going to start to see the Iranians retaliate. And as I said, we're in a campaign mode now. This is not going to be a 3 to 5 day war. Right now people are talking about 4 days of intensive strike. And then what? And then what? Iran is 4 times bigger than Iraq. And we launched, I participated in a major conflict that had a strategic air campaign component against Iraq back in 1991. I also then went back into Iraq for 7 years as a weapons inspector, and the first couple years was basically doing battle damage assessment, visiting destroyed facilities, seeing what we had accomplished. I'm here to tell you right now, you don't accomplish as much as you think. One thing I was told by a senior Iraqi official is, you guys are really good at blowing up empty buildings, and we're really good at pouring concrete. But you didn't get the critical material, the critical machine tools, etc. Iran's been preparing for this attack. Their leadership has been taken to alternative sites. When I visited Iran back in 2005, I had a Revolutionary Guard minder. We were having conversations, and he said, why don't you go to this square in Tehran at this time and then just come back and tell me what you saw. And I went and I looked. I came back and I saw some North Koreans. He said, why do you think they're here? He said, who do you think dug the tunnels for Hezbollah in Lebanon? The same people that dug the tunnels in the mountains north of Seoul, Korea, where all the North Korean artillery pieces are sequestered. And they've been digging nonstop since 2005. Mashhad has an underground city where the government can relocate. Outside of Tehran, underground. They've been going underground. The Iranians are underground right now. We don't have the capacity to beat these people. If you're going to do a decapitation strike, you don't spend an entire month talking about how you're going to do a decapitation strike. One of the biggest mistakes that was made wasn't pulling the trigger in January. We would have had better success had we pulled the trigger in January, but we stopped. January 17th. And what day is it today? February 28th. So we've given them well over a month, almost a month and a half, for the Iranians to go into war mode. And I just don't think people respect the Iranians enough and understand what they've been preparing for. This decapitation strike didn't decapitate. And again, I just want to reemphasize this point because people who don't know war shouldn't be engaged in discussions of war. This war is predicated. You have sequences of things that are supposed to happen. And as they happen, you have resources. We have a finite amount of resources. So we have squadrons that have certain capabilities. We have submarines with certain capabilities. And we take these capabilities and we apply them to a target set. And then as we suppress that target set, we can reallocate these resources onto the next phase. But what happens is if you fail to achieve the results you want, those resources don't get reallocated, they get reinforced. And so we start taking resources that should be doing this over here, we have to pull them away. This happened during Desert Storm. When we thought we were going to interdict Iraqi Scud missiles in the West, we put a whole bunch of F-15 squadrons up front on that problem set, and we failed. And the Iraqis kept launching against Israel. So now those F-15s, which were supposed to be moved at and carrying out critical strikes there, had to remain and get reinforced. And we diverted resources from the rest of the conflict to move on a new war that was developing. This is what's happening right now. Just telling you, I can tell you what's happening in CENTCOM right now. Guys are calling up going, we didn't achieve phase 1 results. They go, well, we got to reinforce. Where are we going to get those? Well, we're going to have to degrade our planned attack on this and have to bring those resources here. And now the intelligence, because this is all. Are we back?
Yeah, we're back. We are, while you dropped, we are getting reports. As you said, the Houthis will join. Well, we have reports now of al-Nusra sending missiles from Yemen, obviously towards Israel. We also have reports from multiple sources that there's a hit in Tel Aviv. You talked about this, made comparisons to the war in Iraq. What weapons do you think the Iran will use? Because we've had reports before this war started that Iran was buying a lot of attack helicopters from Russia. Not sure if you've seen this. Not sure what the purpose of these would be. And is there any other new weaponry that Iran would have purchased from China and Russia that they didn't have back in the 12-Day War. So what would be different now from the 12-Day War that we saw? And also if you can make more comparisons to what we saw in Iraq, so people that were following that war could see the similarities here.
Well, we talk about these helicopters. What would the helicopters be useful for? Not to attack Israel, to attack outside of Iran's borders. We'll just rely on history. During the Gulf War, we, the United States, deployed special operations forces into Western Iraq together with the British. These are from what we colloquially call Delta Force. And there was a battle that took place around February 14th, St. Valentine's Day, where a half squadron reinforced troop was dug in, and the Iraqis started coming after them with helicopters. And the helicopters were online. They were moving forward, deploying troops, moving forward. And this was very problematic for the Delta guys being boxed in. And so they had to start maneuvering out of this. And then F-15s came in, and there's a famous case where the guy dropped a 2,000-pound bomb, and it hit one of the Iraqi helicopters and blew it up. And then that broke the Iraqi helicopter assault, and they had to disperse and run for their lives, and the Delta guys were able to escape. Literally, I think that's what these new helicopters for. If you're planning, if I'm the Iranians, and I'm saying, how are they going to suppress my missiles? Because you have to think like that. You have to say, what is the enemy going to do? You have to assume there's going to be special operations forces operating on the ground inside Iran. So you want the most capable helicopters out there hunting these forces down. And I think that's what these advanced Russian helicopters are designed to do, to work with.
They've already prepped for ground forces, at least special ops being on the ground in Iran. So that's what Iran was prepping for.
I believe so. It'd be stupid not to. Be very stupid not to. So we may not, see the effectiveness of this. Again, if you study the history of American Delta Force operations,